So when a man is sexually assaulting a little child and he's using his free will to be able to do that, where does the child's free will come into play? Where does the God come into play? The all good, all loving God is somewhere out there just watching, granting the man, the abuser's free will, and ignoring the child's free will. I mean, how does that make sense? Unless you're saying every victim of every atrocity willed that, wants that. Where was Jesus when the Catholic priests, the Protestant pastors were touching and raping and sexually assaulting little children? Yesterday, this morning, because this still goes on today. Even slavery is still happening today. Where is this God at? What is he doing? Wherever he is at, what is he doing? Black Christians, white Christians, everyone in between. No Christian has ever been able to answer that question honestly. Christians will always say, by default, free will. That is their get out of jail free, I don't have to think about an actual issue answer. When non-believers ask Christians about free will, and it's like, okay, well, where does it start? Where does it end? Where do you draw the line? When does God fucking choose to intervene, if at all? Why would he intervene and get you a parking spot or a brand new Mercedes or a new job and not do, I don't know, end world hunger? Let's expound on this free will idea. Is it one-sided? Whose free will is honored and why? Right? The age-old question, if the Christian slave owner and the Christian slave pray to the same Christian God, whose prayer is that God going to answer? Was it the Christian slave's free will to endure slavery? So in this video, I'm going to go over 33 instances in the Bible where the God intervened, or he interceded, or he inserted himself to change the trajectory of some type of human affair. So I have my notes here. I have a list of actually 40 verses and instances where the God intervened in some way, shape, or form. But I want to keep it to 33 in this video because, well, Jesus. When we talk about free will, there's several instances and stories in the Bible where God bestowed a child onto someone unsuspectingly, right? We got Abraham and Sarah, Abraham and Hagar, we have Mary, all types of people were just given children, right? And in several instances, God told the parents what to name their child. That to me that stood out to me as not being able to exercise free will. So what I'm seeing now is that some Christians, instead of saying free will now say free choice. Like, oh, God gives you the free choice to choose X or Y, right? He gives you the option and you can freely choose these options, right? So what about whenever he told someone to name their child X? What about when he changed Abram's name? What about when he changed Jacob's name? What about when he said, hey, you're about to have a son. This is what you need to name him. I didn't see a choice there. And then I think if we want to just keep dancing around this topic and diving deep into this topic of free will, you have to ask yourself, or at least I do, what would happen if these people said no? Perfect example, Jonah. Jonah started running away from the Lord, right? And what did he do? He threw a fucking tantrum. A sea storm. He got swallowed by a fish. Because he used his free will to say, you know what, God, I'm actually not about to go warn nobody like you want me to. Let me go to Tarshish. Same way that Christians say, you have the free will to not believe in God. Guess what? The consequence is hell. If Jonah had the free will to not obey God, he suffered consequences. That's literally the opposite of what free will is. Matter of fact, here goes the definition of free will, because that's where we need to start. We have to start with defining what free will means. Moving right along in 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 35, God sent an angel to kill 185,000 Assyrians. Kind of like he did in Exodus when he supposedly sent his death angel to kill all the firstborn sons of the Egyptians, including the cattle. And this is everyone's favorite example of God intervening and actually stopping someone's free will. In Exodus chapter 7, verses 3 through 5, God hardens Pharaoh's heart. Do you remember there's a point after all them fucking plagues, again, God interfering, that Pharaoh was like, you know what? I will let your people go. Get them out. God said, hold on now, I'm not done. I'm going to harden your heart. Pharaoh wanted to use his free will, quote, quote, to free the Israelites. So I don't care what the justification is. I don't care what the reason is or what you claim the context is. The simple fact is that God interfered and intervened with someone's free will. It seems like God has a thing for hardening people's hearts. Like in Deuteronomy 2, verse 30, when he hardened King Sihon's heart. And then, of course, Genesis 6, where God sent the flood to kill all of humanity except for 8 people and some animals. Okay, he can intervene. Remember, again, he rained sulfur and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, he can intervene. Remember, again, he was going to do the same thing in the book of Jonah, but he actually changed his mind. He actually changed his mind because the people use their free will to now go from being evil to not evil. Then we have Genesis 16, verse 11, where God tells Hagar to name her son, her and Abraham's son, Ishmael. What if she liked the name Abimelech? What if she said no? You know what I mean? We already know what happens when you say no. And likewise, in Genesis 17, verse 19, God tells Abraham to name his son Isaac. What if he didn't want to name him Isaac, you know? In Hosea chapter 1, verses 4 through 9, God tells Hosea what to name his children. We got Jezreel, his daughter Lo Ruhamah, and Lo Ami. What if he didn't want to name them that? And then Luke 1:13, Zechariah is told to name his son John. In Genesis 17, verse 5, God changes Abram to Abraham. The man had no say in it. So there you go. Here's your new name. Likewise, his wife Sarai, her name was changed to Sarah. Then we had Jacob, after wrestling with God, God changed his name to Israel. But then sometimes we still call him Jacob. In John chapter 1, verse 42, if you believe Jesus is God, whatever, Jesus changes Simon's name to Peter. In Leviticus 10, verses 1 through 2, God strikes down Nadab and Abihu. In Numbers 22, verses 28 through 31, God opens the mouth of Balaam's donkey. Remember how in Genesis 20, verse 3, God comes to Abimelech in a dream to warn him to not get with Sarah and stop him from committing adultery and facing those consequences. And then remember that time in Joshua chapter 6 when God brought down the walls of Jericho? He was active. And then in Joshua chapter 10, verses 12 through 14, my absolute favorite story of God stopping the sun and the moon so that he can deliver victory for the Israelites. Talk about interfering. And of course, we have in 1 Samuel chapter 5, verses 6 through 12, where God afflicts the Philistines with tumors, kind of like those plagues he sent down in Egypt. In 1 Kings chapter 13, verse 4, God withers a king's hand. And in 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verses 22 and 23, God sent an ambush against Judah's enemies. In Acts chapter 16, verses 25 and 26, God causes an earthquake to free Paul and Silas. In Jonah chapter 1, starting at verse 4, God sends a sea storm, a violent storm, because Jonah didn't want to do what he said. And then later on at the end of that chapter, he makes a fish swallow Jonah. So even animals don't have free will. Oh, and then remember in Genesis 11 when the people were building a tower and they were working together, they all spoke the same language, and God said, Yaga, no you're not. He confuses all their languages and knocked over the Tower of Babel. So that would be some some serious intervention, if you ask me. And in Acts 5, verses 1 through 11, God kills Ananias and Sapphira. This really is a war god because, again, in Acts 12, verse 23, he strikes Herod dead. The thing about God's intervention is not all smiting, is not all violence and killing sometimes. Sometimes, like in Exodus 16, 13 through 15, he allows manna to rain from heaven, but only after his people had been suffering and complaining about starving for so long. I think this one a lot of people don't really pinpoint as the God interfering, because whenever the story is told, everyone just talks about like the reason behind it. So in Genesis 22 verses 11 through 12, where Abraham was ready to sacrifice his son Isaac to the Lord, and then the angel of the Lord stops him from doing that. His free will, he heard God tell him like, hey, sacrifice your son. He immediately and instantly obeyed. And so he had every will to do this. We know this because immediately after, the angel's like, oh, okay, now I know that you trust the Lord. I guess I didn't know that before. So anyways, his free will was infringed upon. He wanted to kill his son. And I think we'll end on Luke 1, verses 30 through 31, where Mary is selected to give birth to Jesus. What if she would have said no? I mean, she was a teenager after all. So that was just a small example of the God in this book interfering with human affairs, whether for good or bad or whatever, however you want to look at it. Regardless, he intervenes in this book. You can also see several examples of him commanding his will be done. These do not indicate to me that the Christians or the people in this book have free will. It just doesn't compute. Thank you for watching this video. Go ahead and thumbs up if you liked it. Leave a comment down below. Share and continue the conversation. I go by the name of Skeptic Gal here on YouTube and on TikTok, so be sure to follow me there if you aren't already. And I will see you in the next one.